I don't usually eavesdrop on other people's conversations, and I still can't quite figure out what compelled me to listen in on this one. It was a Sunday afternoon, and I was in the basement tinkering with the hot water heater when I heard the phone ring. I wasn't sure what my wife, Karen, was doing upstairs, but since the basement phone was within reach, I picked up the phone before I could stop myself. I heard her voice on the other end from the upstairs extension. "Kevin, you really shouldn't be calling here. We've got everything set for tomorrow. We'll meet at the Horizon Lodge in room 214. Be there at 1 p.m. sharp. I've got a bottle chilling and fresh strawberries waiting. Don't forget that black silk lingerie you told me about." "You sound nervous," Kevin said, teasing slightly. "I'm not sure yet." No, Karen replied quickly. "Everything's fine. It's just that I've never done anything like this before, and naturally I'm a little scared, but I'm not going to back out. It'll all be fine. I promise. Just remember, if Peter ever finds out about this, I'd be devastated. I better go before he overhears something. See you tomorrow at 1 o'clock. PSM." I hung up the phone at the same time they did and sat there stunned for the next 10 minutes. I replayed that entire conversation in my head. Why the hell did I have to pick up that phone? Karen and I had known each other practically our whole lives. We'd gotten married a year after high school graduation. She was the only woman I'd ever been with, and I had always assumed I was the only man she'd been with too. Even now, she was beautiful and kept herself in great shape. We had one son, Brian, who was in his senior year of high school. We didn't socialize much outside of each other, and I thought everything between us was fine. I could confront her immediately and blow everything up with a dramatic confrontation, but that didn't appeal to me. My second option was to drop a few hints and say something that would make her think I was suspicious. That idea seemed better, but it would just delay the inevitable. Then there was option 3, let her go through with it. I found myself liking that option more and more. With one slight twist, I'd let things play out but give her a chance to back out. If she took the exit, I'd be fine with that. If not, I'd have to confront her. She had her own choices to make. Maybe I'd be lucky and she'd changed her mind. But I doubted that she'd take the exit I was going to offer. The most likely outcome was that she'd go through with it. Now that I had a rough idea of my plan, it was clear to me that she would. I started to feel a bit excited, actually. I figured I'd dive into some serious planning after dinner. I needed to gather more information. I'd been working for a security systems company for nearly 20 years. For the past year, they'd been encouraging me to take over the Huntsville, Alabama office. Karen, however, had always been against relocating. She'd worked at an insurance company for the past decade and was doing pretty well. I'd never liked her coworker, Kevin Mitchell. I guess my gut had been right about him all along. He was married, and his wife seemed nice enough, but now he wanted mine too. The move to Alabama would be good for Brian since he had his heart set on attending Auburn, where the in-state tuition would be far more affordable. While we were having dinner that night, I made up my mind to take the Huntsville job, no matter what happened. The next day, I could declare residency there, and by the time Brian started school, he'd qualify for in-state tuition. I didn't think Brian needed to know yet, but I decided to tell him after dinner. I'd give notice at work in the morning and start packing as soon as possible. Once I'd made that decision, the rest of my plans began to fall into place. Brian and I had always gotten along well. When I explained that I was planning to go to Alabama ahead of the rest of the family, thought it was a good idea and agreed to keep it between us for now. I didn't mention anything about his mother's plans for the following day. I wasn't entirely sure how I was going to handle that yet, but I was confident something would come to me by the end of the night. Later, I told Karen I needed to make a trip to Home Depot for some supplies and headed out. My first purchase was a disposable cell phone with a 60-day plan. I got a minute calling card because I knew I'd be making quite a few calls and I didn't want any of them tracked back to me afterward. I swung by my usual bar where some old school friends who were less than reputable hung out. I borrowed a car door unlocking tool while I was there. Tony Hayes, a guy I didn't know well but knew of, was at the bar. He had a reputation for being tough, so most people steered clear of him. I noticed his Corvette in the parking lot when I left, so I got a screwdriver from my car, and within a minute I had his license plate. I knew where he worked, so I'd be able to contact him if necessary. My next stop was the Horizon Lodge. I wandered around the lobby casually, browsing brochures for local attractions and restaurants, picking up what I needed. The clerk at the desk gave me some details about the motel, including a map and the phone numbers for housekeeping and room service. When I got home, Karen was watching TV. I told her she said she had some work to do in the office and she was planning on taking an early shower and heading to bed since she had a big day tomorrow. While she was in the shower, I looked through her briefcase and found her planner and address book. I spent the next half hour writing down names and phone numbers, trying to prepare for what was coming next. Then I had to do the tedious part. I had to input all the phone numbers into both the disposable phone and my personal one. I still had a few more numbers to dig up from the phone book before everything was set. After what seemed like hours, I finally had all the pieces in place and collapsed onto the office couch that night. Sleep was a distant dream. My thoughts kept circling around Karen and what she was planning to do. I couldn't help but wonder where I had gone wrong and what I had done to push her into this. By the time exhaustion finally overtook me, I had convinced myself that I was somehow to blame. When morning came, I was flooded with a rush of emotions. I got up, made some coffee, and set the breakfast table. When Karen came downstairs, she looked absolutely stunning. "You look really nice today," I said, trying to sound casual. "Is there something special happening at the office?" she shot back. "What are you talking about?" "I always look nice," I replied, with a weak smile. "Just messing with you," we both said, falling silent and flipping through the morning paper as we ate. There was a palpable tension in the air. The conversation was lighter than usual, almost forced. I wasn't sure if she was on edge or secretly excited. "I've got a lot of errands today," I said as I finished my coffee. "I might not be back until late for dinner." "That's fine," she replied. "I'll make something that'll keep until you get home." "Is there anything specific you'd like?" "Whatever's easiest is fine." We were both dancing around the obvious. We were both acting like everything was normal, even though we both knew exactly what was happening. After breakfast, I arrived at work early and began finalizing the details for my move to Huntsville. I signed all the necessary paperwork, cleaned out my desk, and then made a stop at a divorce lawyer's office. I collected all the forms and information I'd need if my last-ditch effort didn't work out. Afterward, I drove home, packed up my clothes, and loaded everything into my car. I gathered any important files or documents from my computer and moved the valuable coins, which were most of our savings, to a safe place. By the time the banks opened, I had already closed our joint accounts and canceled the credit cards. I knew I was acting hastily on some of this, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Karen's decision was already made on my way back. I stopped at the florist and ordered a dozen red roses to be delivered precisely at 11:15. Timing was going to be everything at 12. I pulled into the Horizon Lodge parking lot and found a spot where I could see room 214 without being noticed. I carefully arranged everything I needed on the passenger seat of my car and waited. Soon enough, Kevin showed up. He stepped out of his car carrying a grocery bag, probably the strawberries, and he came back out to fill the room's ice bucket as he prepped the scene. I started making my phone calls. The first was to a pizzeria. I said, "Hi. I'd like a large pepperoni pizza delivered to room 214 at the Horizon Lodge. I might be in the shower when it gets there. Just make sure the delivery person knocks loudly enough for me to hear. I'm fine with waiting 20 minutes. I made similar calls to 3 more pizzerias just to spread things out. Then I switched it up and ordered egg rolls and sweet and sour pork from a nearby Chinese restaurant. I figured some of the restaurants might call back too. I called to confirm, but it didn't matter. Karen hadn't shown up yet, so I made another call to the motel's housekeeping, asking for extra towels and an additional ice bucket. I figured they'd show up in about 15 minutes. Finally, I spotted Karen's car pulling into the lot. She'd parked at the far end, clearly trying to keep it hidden with a small overnight bag in hand. I walked toward room 214 when I was about 20 feet from the door. I dialed her number. "Hey, it's me," I said, keeping my tone light. "I'll let you get back to work. See you later." She paused for a second. "Bye." I hung up the phone and watched as she turned and entered the motel room. That was her last chance to change her mind. She did. I didn't take it. A tear slipped from my eye as I continued with my plan. The seventh call was to the local TV station. "Hi. I think there's something unusual happening at the Horizon Lodge. If you've got a camera crew nearby, it might be worth checking it out. I'm not sure exactly what's going on, but I heard the police are already on their way." Thanks. As I ended that call, I made my way over to Kevin's car. Luckily, he had parked in a spot where I could discreetly swap his license plate with Tony's without being seen. Once I finished, I dialed Karen's office. I knew she had a 3. I have a 00 appointment with a client named Jeff Turner. "Hi, this is Jeff Turner. I had a meeting scheduled with Karen Price for this afternoon, but I need to reschedule. Could you have her give me a call when she gets back in after swapping Kevin's license plate with Tony's?" I went behind the motel, out of sight, as I made my way back to my car. I called the next number on my list. "Hello, Mrs. Mitchell, this is a friend of your husband. He asked me to let you know that he's having some car trouble and needs you to pick him up immediately. He's at the Horizon Lodge in room 214. You can reach him on his cell or through the motel's phone system at 962-8, 822 extension 214. She was a bit hesitant, so I added, "I'm not sure why he didn't call you directly, but I believe he's meeting with a client, a rather attractive one, in fact. Goodbye." Next, I made a call to Tony's workplace, Prime Metal Works, and asked to speak with his supervisor. "Could you please let Tony know that there's a white Honda parked at the Horizon Lodge with his license plate on it?" "Thanks." After that, I called the police and reported seeing a couple of people swapping license plates. I went to the Horizon Lodge parking lot and told them that something didn't seem quite right. I gave them Tony's license plate number and suggested they look into it. The first pizza delivery arrived at the motel room not long after. It looked like there was some confusion at the door, but Kevin eventually paid for it and the delivery guy left. I kept going with my calls. The next one was to Karen's mother. "Hi, Mom, it's Peter." I don't have much time to explain, but Karen is at a motel with one of her coworkers. "Hey guys, could someone please give her a call and try to talk some sense into her before she does something she'll regret? You can try reaching her on her cell, and if that doesn't work, call the Horizon Lodge directly at 962-8, 822 extension 214. Sorry, I have to go. Please make the call now," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "There's a leak under the bathroom sink, and the water is starting to seep onto the carpet. Could you send someone to take care of it right away? Thanks." A loud motorcycle pulled into the parking lot a few moments later, cruising slowly down the rows of cars. It was Tony, of course. He parked right behind Kevin's car, but before he could do much of anything, a police car pulled in. Tony started gesturing wildly, and soon enough, he was in a heated discussion with the officer. "I'm afraid I have to tell you that she's currently at the Horizon Lodge in room 214 with Kevin Mitchell, who I believe is one of your other employees. I'm sure you have a company policy against this kind of behavior, don't you? If this is a violation, perhaps you should contact them both to confirm the motel's number is 962-8. 822 extension 214. I'm writing to inform you that I no longer want my wife employed by your company. I would also recommend looking into Kevin's employment status. I apologize for having to bring this to your attention, but I felt it was necessary. Goodbye, I'm on my way there now. I don't want the police or reporters to catch her in a compromising position. Could you call her and tell her to get dressed before I arrive?" She's at the Horizon Lodge, room 214. If she doesn't answer her cell, try the motel phone. I moved her car to she's at the back of the motel, so she might need a lift if you can get there before I do. Maybe you could pick her up and take her home? I really appreciate your help. Give me a call when you can. Thanks. Things were getting pretty chaotic at the motel door. The maintenance worker had shown up. I was up to fix the sink. The delivery guy was trying to collect payment, and Tony was still arguing with the cop, who was now speaking to Kevin. Just then, a florist arrived with the roses I had sent, but they were having some trouble at the door. It was my cue to leave. My work here was done. I left and passed a TV crew pulling into the parking lot on my way home. I tossed the disposable phone into the river and kept driving. I stopped briefly at the house to say goodbye to Brian. I told him I'd keep in touch and asked him not to be too hard on his mother over the next few days. I really wished I could have found out what was going on in that motel room during the last hour as I drove out of town. I made one last call, even though I wasn't sure if he'd even pick up. But I figured it was worth a try. "Kevin, this is Peter," I said firmly when he answered. "I want you to listen carefully. If you touch my wife, there will be consequences. Do you understand me?" There was a long pause on the other end before he responded. His voice was uneasy. Yes, I understand." I didn't bother to say anything else. I hung up the phone and focused back on the road, heading toward the 8 hours later. My phone rang again. It was Karen. "Peter, where are you?" she asked. Her voice was filled with confusion and a hint of desperation. "I'm driving down I-81 just outside Knoxville." "Why? What is happening?" "We need to talk." I didn't waver. "There's nothing left to talk about, Karen." "Please, Peter," she said, her voice softening. "Just talk to me." "All right," he replied. "I'll ask you 3 questions. Be honest with me, and then maybe we can talk." "Okay," she said quietly. "What did I say to you when I called earlier?" "You said, 'I love you.' What did you do after we hung up?" Silence. "I went into the motel room." "Why did you go into that motel room?" Another long pause. "Pa Peter." "I don't want to answer that." "Goodbye, Karen." I ended the call and powered off my phone. I wouldn't be needing it for the rest of my trip with the company. I got a new phone service, updated my mailing address, transferred my car title, and got a new driver's license. I even registered to vote and completed the necessary paperwork to declare my residency. After mailing off the documents to start the divorce proceedings, I felt like everything was finally moving forward smoothly. I was ready to begin my new job and new life. I called Brian to give him my new cell number and asked him to keep it private from his mother. I also told him I'd understand if she pressured him into sharing it, but he didn't think it would come to that. He also mentioned that Karen had lost her job and wasn't handling it well. I asked if they needed anything, but Brian assured me they were managing just fine. A few weeks later, Brian told me that Karen had received the divorce papers. She signed them and returned them the same day, apparently without even reading them. He also said she had stopped wearing makeup and was selling off most of her clothes and jewelry nearly every weekend. She held a yard sale, selling anything that wasn't nailed down. I'd given my power of attorney to handle the house sale. She didn't care about the profits. Eventually, Karen found a job at a small bakery near our old house. Right before Brian graduated, she put the house up for sale at a ridiculously low price. It sold almost immediately, with the condition that she and Brian could stay until graduation. Karen found a tiny apartment close to the bakery, and she gave Brian the car when he left for college. The apartment was small, just a simple upstairs unit, and whatever she didn't need, she left behind. Ed was still in the house. Brian helped her move, and then he left for Auburn. By the time he moved out, Karen had practically stripped the place. She got rid of everything from the old house. Brian told me her new place looked like a monk's quarters, bare, sparse, and lonely. Even though Karen had never denied Brian anything, it seemed like she was punishing herself by cutting herself off from every comfort. Brian was always there for her whenever we talked. 4 years flew by. It was about an hour's drive from where I lived to Auburn, and I didn't get to see much of Brian. He was busy with school and his friends, and I was consumed with work. Karen had the title company send me the entire check after she sold the house. She didn't keep a cent. I deposited the money into a folder I had set aside for her. During that time, I bought a small house and spent the days fixing it up and making improvements here and there. I didn't date or socialize much because I just wasn't interested. I craved companionship but wasn't willing to get close to anyone. Graduation day finally arrived, and I made the drive to see my son receive his diploma. We had assigned seats at the ceremony, and Karen was seated right next to me despite everything that had happened. It was good to see her again. She looked all right, though a bit tired, older, and a little worn down. She didn't wear makeup anymore, and her lack of grooming gave her a sadder, more weary appearance. We exchanged smiles and a quiet hello. There wasn't much time for conversation as the ceremony started. Honestly, I don't think either of us knew what to say. Soon enough, it was over. The awkwardness between us was interrupted when Brian came rushing over, grinning from ear to ear, excited about finally earning his degree. He was full of energy, talking rapidly, and glowing with pride. It was great to watch him bask in the moment. A few of his friends came over to introduce themselves, and shortly after that, they all headed off to Gulf Shores to celebrate. Karen and I were left alone with each other. I asked, "How did you get here?" She replied, "I've got a round-trip ticket and I need to be back at the station by 6. I said, "Sure, no problem." "When do you need to be back?" She said, "I took a week off, but I can't stay here. I was just going to head back tonight and spend the rest of the week." "Painting my apartment sounds like a blast," I said with a slight smile. She chuckled. "What's the alternative? You could stay at my place for a few days. I can drive you back when you're ready. It's a better option than the bus." "Anything's better than the bus," she said with a half smile. "Staying at your place, though, I don't think that's a good idea. It would be too hard on both of us. We never really talked things through. I was angry back then and cut you off completely. I never gave you a chance to explain anything, and I've regretted that over the years. Now you want me to explain everything after our lives have already fallen apart. Isn't it a little late?" "I think it might be. I wouldn't have listened back then. Why would you listen now?" "I don't know," I said, pausing for a moment. "Even if we don't end up talking about the past, I'd still enjoy your company for a few days. Are you sure you can't spare the time?" She hesitated. "I've got the week off. I suppose I didn't bring any luggage, though." "No worries. We'll stop at Walmart and pick up some clothes. It's a 4-hour drive. And I'd love the company. I can't imagine anything good coming from this," she said, sounding uncertain, "but I'll give it a try. If you do anything to upset me, though, I'll walk away without a second thought." "Fair enough. My car's this way." We drove in silence for the first few miles. After a while, we stopped near Birmingham, and I bought her some new clothes, underwear, slacks, and a few tops. I managed to convince her to get a pair of sneakers, but she refused to buy any makeup. I didn't push the issue. Afterward, we grabbed dinner at a country table restaurant she'd always enjoyed. As we continued our drive up I-65, she finally opened up about the answer to your last question. She said quietly. I glanced over, confused. "What was that day on the phone?" "The answer to your last question was intimacy." I went into the motel room. She took a deep breath. I couldn't bring myself to say it out loud at the time. I don't know why. Maybe I was too embarrassed, or maybe I didn't want to hurt you. But after you hung up, I realized you already knew. I tried to call you back, but your phone was off. That's when I knew my life was over. You broke my heart. I said quietly, "I know." I don't know how to make it right. I've spent so many nights lying awake trying to figure out how to fix it, but I couldn't come up with anything. You're the only one who could have done that. You could have said something. Karen, if you'd known I was aware, you might have stopped, but for the wrong reasons. I didn't want you to avoid it just because you thought you might get caught. The point was that you needed to stop because you knew it was wrong, not because you feared being found out. Does that make sense? Yes, it does. I wish you had said something. I did during that last phone call. You mean the one where you told me you loved me? I gave you a chance to stop before things went any further. I gave you the opportunity to choose. It was a test, and I failed. I was so stupid. I won't argue with that. Did you ever love him, Kevin? Heavens, no. Kevin loved his wife as much as I loved you. We were just friends. I don't get it. If it wasn't love, was it just lust? No, not even close. She said, shaking her head. There was nothing like that between us. Honestly, it was more platonic than anything. Kevin and I were just friends with no real desire to take it beyond that. Then how in the world did you two end up at a motel planning to have sex? It's a long story. She told me that we still have about an hour until we reach Huntsville, so I'll tell you what happened. Kevin and I had been working together for nearly a year. We talked about all kinds of things, and eventually, we started discussing intimacy. Neither of us had ever been with anyone other than our spouses. We weren't complaining about our marriages, but we got curious the more we talked. As we talked more, we got more comfortable with the idea. One day, we started discussing having sex with each other just to see what it would be like, with no strings attached. It would only happen once. It felt more like two adults playing doctor than anything else. I know it sounds ridiculous now, but that's how it all started. Did you ever think there might be consequences? I was honest with you. At the time, we were so detached from reality that it seemed as casual as going to the movies together. I didn't think you'd ever find out, so I didn't imagine it would hurt you. I was wrong, and I'm truly sorry. What about Kevin's wife? How did she take it? She almost divorced him. Karen said quietly, I went to see her and explained everything. I'm doing the same with you now. You know she didn't go through with the divorce, but I doubt their marriage was ever the same. Kevin was fired when I was, but he tried to fight it. He argued that since we never actually had sex, he didn't violate any company policy. The arbitration board didn't buy it, though. They moved to Baltimore, and I haven't seen them since. By the time we pulled up to the house, I was relieved the conversation had been over. It was a necessary conversation, but it wasn't easy to hear. I showed Karen to my room and took the guest room for the night, making sure she had everything she needed. Good night, I said. There will be more talking tomorrow, hopefully more pleasant than today's discussion. The next morning, I woke up to the smell of breakfast, something I hadn't experienced in years. Karen had made it for me the first time in a long while. I didn't have to fend for myself, so I said, tell me again about this intimacy with Kevin. She laughed and threw a napkin at me. You know, there was no intimacy, and you know exactly why. I guess I ruined a romantic afternoon for you. Get real, she said with a smirk. You know the situation. He brought drinks and strawberries, but it wasn't romantic. Don't make it sound worse than it was. It sounds worse than it was. All right, I said, holding up my hands. Did you two do anything? Oh yeah, she said sarcastically. We answered at least a dozen phone calls and dealt with another dozen knocks on the door. Some twisted idiot had everyone and their brother calling or knocking. That was the closest we got to sex. I asked with a raised brow, was that when I took my shoes off? It was the most miserable half hour of my life, she said, shaking her head while that biker was trying to break down the door to get to Kevin. I snuck out when I saw that my car was gone. I just broke down and cried. That's when Kate showed up. You called my sister, and worse than that, you called my mom. She still isn't speaking to me. I'm sorry if I ruined something so important to you, she said. Her voice she spoke with a hint of sarcasm, saying, I take full responsibility for what I did. It was awful. You can't just claim that I said, oh, no you don't. I'm the one at fault here. I'm the one who caused this whole mess, and you can't take that away from me. I've spent years drowning in guilt. I'm not going to let you take credit for this. Maybe so, she said softly, but I still feel partially responsible. I should carry some of the blame. Don't do that to yourself, Karen said softly. The moment I stepped into that motel room, I lost all my self-respect. Is something I'll never get back, but thanks to your phone calls, you saved my virtue. I'm grateful every single day. I only wish you could have done something sooner, but now I understand why you didn't. It's a sad situation, Peter. I've always loved you and never wanted to hurt you. I'm sorry for everything. I won't ask for forgiveness because frankly, I don't feel like I deserve it. Losing your love and trust has been the most painful thing I've ever experienced. Karen, I said you never lost my love. She nodded, her eyes softening. I'm glad to hear that, Peter, but what about the trust? I hesitated, looking away. That's gone, Karen. I don't know if I can ever get that back. She sighed deeply. That's fair. It's only right. She glanced over at me, trying to shift the mood. What are we doing for lunch? How about sushi? Perfect. Do you think I'm dressed okay for it? We had a good afternoon together despite everything. After lunch, we stopped for some. We went shopping to get Karen a few outfits that were a bit more stylish than her usual look. I even managed to convince her to buy some lip gloss. Nothing too fancy, just a little something. Later, we had a light dinner of soup, cheese, and crackers, and sat down with a nice drink. It was good to see Karen starting to relax. I got glimpses of the woman I used to know. The more we talked, the more comfortable things became. Then, out of the blue, she asked, Peter, are we going to have intimacy tonight? I wasn't sure how to respond. I don't know. I still have some issues. She laughed. Issues, seriously? Yeah, well, I'm worried that if we make love, I'll be thinking. I can't help but think about you and Kevin the whole time. I'm sure you'll be thinking about her too. Karen rolled her eyes. That's nonsense, and you know it. How would you know? I shot back. With a mischievous smile, she said, about 30 years ago when we first started dating, you told me you used to fantasize about Pam Young, the cheerleader. Do you remember when I blinked and was caught off guard? Did I actually tell you that? Oh yes, she said, grinning. For the next 4 or 5 years, every time we made love, all I could think about was you imagining Pam Young. You've got to be kidding me. Nope, Karen said, with a smirk. Now the tables have turned, and you can't handle it. You've dealt with it, so why can't you? I gave a shrug. Fair enough. So who do you fantasize about when you're, not at work? She teased, sticking her tongue out. Come on. We all fantasize. Who's your dream lover? She relented with a laugh. Most of the time, it's you. Even after everything. I pressed her again. Who is it? She hesitated, then grinned sheepishly. You're not going to laugh, are you? I said, leaning in. Mel Gibson. She confessed. I burst out laughing. You're joking. I'm not. She insisted, giggling. I've always had this thing for Mel Gibson. I don't think it's weird. He's very attractive. Okay. I said, still laughing, but that makes me wonder. Over the past 5 years, who have you been fantasizing about when you're, relieving tension? She shot me a look. Believe it or not, I've never really stopped thinking about you. I smirked. Same question back at you. She raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? You mean mostly, I shrugged again. Sometimes I think about you and Kevin together. Karen gasped playfully, shoving me. You're sick. You fantasize about Kevin and me so you can get your kicks. No, not exactly. After everything happened, I wondered why you'd want to be with him. I couldn't. I figured it out. I convinced myself that maybe he was a better lover than me. I used to think about how he might have pleased you over time. I started focusing on the idea of you getting pleasure, blocking out the fact that it was with another guy. Somehow it became erotic to me. She stared at me for a moment, then shook her head. Laughing softly, she said, "Well, we're even now. Let's get on with it." She stood up and stretched. "I'm going to take a shower, and after that, we're going to make love. You can think about Pam Young, and I'll be thinking about Mel Gibson. It's settled." She smiled at me playfully. "Tomorrow, we'll go grab my things, and I'm moving in with you. Are you ready? So, are we getting married?" I blinked. "Wait, married? I don't think I can marry someone I don't fully trust yet. Maybe in a few years we can revisit the idea." "Oh, I get it. She teased you. You just want to stay single in case another Kevin comes along, huh? You're an idiot. One more remark like that and I'll smack you. Upside, disconnect the phones. I don't want any interruptions." We laughed and got to work. It only took about an hour to load up the car with her things. Brian wasn't wrong. She had really sold off almost everything. She even sold the remaining furniture to the landlord for $200. As I finished packing, she ran over. We stopped by the bakery to let them know she was leaving for good. Then we hit the interstate, heading south. At some point during the drive, I looked over at her and we shared a smile. "I had just one more question," I said. "I promise I won't bring it up again." "Okay," she said, curious. "What is it? Where on earth did you get a Mel Gibson poster?"